Thanks for tuning in to the Hero Signal. This build guide has to do with Captain America, and this build is what I'm calling the Unstoppable Ricochet build. For those that have used my builds before on any of the games that I've covered, you'll know that I create guides around the easiest and most powerful builds, and for Captain America, it turned out that his most powerful kit seems to be in his ranged attacks. At first, you may think that his shield throw is a little strange to use, but the more you use it, the more you'll realize how insanely powerful this build is, destroying entire rooms of enemies in seconds. Let's get started on how you'll want to build your Captain America for this Unstoppable Ricochet build. You'll want to focus on three main stats. Precision is your primary stat. You'll want to get this as high as possible, as long as you maintain a fairly proportionate resolve stat. Precision is your ranged damage, and the higher you get it, the stronger you'll be. Resolve is your health pool, and you'll want this relatively high as well. Due to Captain America being a ranged character in this instance, you won't always be able to dodge every single attack, though you can mitigate attacks really well, but we'll get into that near the end of the video. Basically, you want high resolve so that you can take a hit or two if you miss a dodge. The third stat that you're going to want is proficiency. Proficiency is your critical hit chance, and if you want those big damage numbers, proficiency will provide them consistently. If you're just getting started with Captain America, I'll save you some time and tell you that you should max out his ranged abilities first. Start with Ricochet Throw and then Shield Kick. Then upgrade Ricochet Throw and the rest of the ranged abilities. As far as the other trees in the primary category, Soldier Slam on the heavy tree as well as Commander's Call are both really great abilities, and you can get some use out of them. Commander's Call will also proc a buff, Captain's Defense, which reduces all damage by 15%, and the move itself has a very high stun capability, so it can be extremely useful, especially when overrun with enemies. There isn't anything that you need in the light attack tree for this build, so feel free to wait on those for last, but the intrinsic ability tree can be helpful, so pick those up when you are able. Mirror Shield is actually very useful, especially when fighting adaptoids that love to use their lasers on you from range. Let's hit the specialty and mastery trees now. In your specialty tree, what we're going to start with is the first upgrade to your ultimate ability, Brooklyn Brawler, which is Strong-Willed. It'll give you 25% of your willpower back, and it's going to be your saving grace if you take on too much damage. The rest of the trees you can unlock as points become available. Here are the options to select for the Unstoppable Ricochet build in the specialty tree. For the support heroic ability Rally Cry, we're going to use Point Man on the left-hand tree. Point Man taunts enemies, which makes you a target, but it reduces all incoming damage quite a bit, so consider this more of a defensive buff, and the taunt is kinda secondary. Rally Cry also boosts your damage to taunted enemies, so you won't even notice the extra attention, as your damage will be increased and you'll drop an entire room of enemies in seconds. For the right side, we're going to use Threat Control. This gives you an additional 15% stun gauge damage boost. This is really for those big bosses, and since we're planning on a higher than average critical chance, you'll make some good use out of this one. If you find yourself in need of health more often, you can opt for Hold the Line instead, which gives you a 35% chance for enemies to drop a health pack on defeat. But it really won't be necessary, and the added stun damage is actually quite a bit more useful on difficult enemies. For the Assault heroic ability Steamroller, on the Specialization 1 tree, we're going to select Secret Weapon, which gives you the ability to use Steamroller twice. This ability is quite helpful in clearing rooms. While you'll be doing plenty of range damage on your own, Steamroller is great because during its activation, you are immune to damage. So if you find yourself in trouble, you can activate this ability not just once, but twice. It's your get out of jail free card. Keep in mind that after activation, you will become vulnerable again. So once the shield is in the air, get out of harm's way. For the second specialization, opt for Vanguard Charge. Every 2 enemies defeated will give you 1 Heroic Orb. We want Heroic Orbs so that we have more charges of each of our powers, and Steamroller already charges pretty quickly, so you can use it far more often as long as you've got some Heroic Orbs rolling in. Under Ultimate Heroic Ability Brooklyn Brawler, the first specialization tree, you'll want to get Strong Arm. Seriously, a 25% attack damage boost to ranged abilities is pretty amazing, and you can stack this with Rally Cry's damage increase to taunted enemies to melt bosses or shielded foes in no time. For the second specialization on the right, Unfair Advantage is what you'll want. Heroic Orbs are going to rain down on you, and being able to use Brooklyn Brawler as both a heal and a damage boost is more important than keeping it active longer through another option like Adrenaline Rush. Let's go on to the Mastery Tree. For the Mastery Tree, prioritize the ranged attack tree and pick up the center and left abilities first. On the left-hand side of the ranged tree, Enhanced Throw will increase speed and damage of all shield throws, which is a no-brainer. On the center tree, increase damage by another 15% on targets hit by a ranged power attack. The shield kick is considered a ranged power attack, and it will hit just about everybody, so you want this as soon as possible. To round out the ranged attack tree, on the throw utility tier, we want Precision Heroic Dynamo, which will give us heroic orbs for headshots. Next, let's go on to the combat tree. On the left, we want Ranged Damage Mastery because, you guessed it, it increases all ranged attacks by 15%. If you've been paying attention, that means ranged power attacks have already been increased nearly 50%, and that's before gear. On the center tree, we're going to select Combo Finisher Critical Mastery, which increases critical attack damage by 15% for light and heavy combo finishers. On the right tree for takedown specialization, we're going to go with Heroic Takedown Mastery. Now let's move on to the efficiency tree. Let's save some time here. Select the first tier across the board. The fact of the matter is, most of this has to do with blocking, and while we're going to use our block sometimes, the vast majority of what you'll be doing is staying back, throwing your shield, so you don't need all these fancy intrinsic generators. The first tier across the board increases your maximum intrinsic pool by 15%, so that's 45% more intrinsic power, and we're going to use that for traversal. You can run much faster using your shield charge, which you can do holding down the intrinsic button, R2 on controllers, while running, and you'll get around faster than you would just running normally. It'll also block any attacks except certain rocket attacks during your run, so while you don't have to prioritize these abilities in the efficiency tree, they do have a use. It will also let you block attacks for longer as well, which may be necessary in certain situations. Lastly, for the intrinsic tree, in the first tier, Captain's Defense Mastery increases the Captain's Defense buff by 8 seconds. In the center tree, the first option, Defense Attack Efficiency 2, will reduce the cost of intrinsic attacks. This is helpful so that you can proc the Captain's Defense buff when you need it. In the last tree, to the right, Iron Defense is our option, as it won't drain your intrinsic energy when you block attacks as long as Captain's Defense is active. There are very specific use cases for this, but this is by far the easiest option to use of the three choices. As for gearing, my recommendation is either Pim Shrink or Graviton gear that procs on ranged attacks or ranged heavy attacks. Graviton is actually amazing for this build because it will raise affected enemies into the air so they are helpless against repeated attacks, and since the Unstoppable Ricochet build hits so many enemies with each shield throw, you could have a room of difficult enemies stuck in the air waiting to get a shield in the face. As usual, I'll have a follow-up video on special gear perks later on. Now that we've gotten your Captain America build worked out, let's finish this video with how to play him. Captain America will be played as a ranged character here, so the first rule to keep in mind is that you don't want any enemies behind you. When entering combat, just be mindful of where the enemies are and keep them in front of you. Hold down the aim and intrinsic buttons, L2 and R2 on controllers, and select an enemy you want to hit. You don't need to select more than one enemy. The power of this build isn't in the initial throw, it's in the shield kick ricochet, and it's usually faster to quick charge your initial throw to use the shield kick combination as fast as possible. Keep in mind that even when you're aiming at an enemy, you can still move around and dodge, so always be on the move, always be dodging. The cool thing about this build is that you don't really have to focus on each enemy specifically. The shield will do the work for you. It'll bounce around to several different enemies and it has a pretty high impact, so it'll interrupt almost every enemy type with few exceptions. It'll also destroy rockets that are volleyed at you and make very quick work of aerial enemies. If you're on the ground trying to get distance, run using your shield charge so you get away safely. If you're low on health or just want a damage buff, use Brooklyn Brawler. Rally Cry will also be helpful if you need a defensive buff, but it can also stun enemies for a second so you can get out of a jam. As mentioned before, Steamroller is your get out of jail free card, so use it when you find yourself in situations that you can't easily escape from. I hope you find this build as fun and powerful as I have. If you have any questions or just want to talk about the build, pop into the comments and leave me a message. Please subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you in game.